Welcome back. I've got Britt East online. Britt, how are you?
I'm doing great. What about yourself?
I am doing great on this sunny day, and those are always fun to have. So, thank you so much for being on the show. You've got an interesting story and new author as well, a new book. So, why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll dive into the new book and chat about that.
Absolutely. I live in Seattle. The book is called A Gay Man's Guide to Life, and I wrote it as a love letter to the queer community. I wanted to be the big brother that maybe they never had. If growing up they lacked resources or access to, certain knowledge or wisdom or insights, that's what I'm trying to provide in the book. So I've been doing this work for 2 decades now, and this was my first foray into writing an entire book. I've been a writer my entire life, but I've never done a project quite like this. And I was hesitant. It's a lot of work and a huge commitment. And also because I was nervous about sharing so much personal history and finding a way that would simultaneously preserve the anonymity of everyone involved, yet still paint a rich picture so the reader could relate to where I've been and what I've gone through. And I also didn't want to make myself the center of the story. I wanted the reader to be the hero in the journey. And so it took me a long time to figure out a way to do that. And I realized that I could flip the script. Instead of just writing a straight up memoir, I could make it more about my experience, strength, and hope along the way. And then interweave my personal story as a way to build rapport and credibility with the reader and give some context. And most importantly, so the reader knows that they're not alone. And that was my intention with the book. And so I just broke down all the major facets of life into logical categories like body, mind, spirit, career, finance, family, friends, and so readers can dip in and dip out based on whatever topic that they might be struggling with in a given period of their life.
That's an amazing story, and love how you laid the book out. And those books where you can pop in and grab something as you need and come back. And obviously, I would recommend people read the entire book, but dog ears or bookmarks or whatever the case may be for those particular sections, because as throughout life, different challenges come up at different times. And you said something very early on that really impressed me was the intent of your book was to be a big brother to people. And even though as society, Pride Month and all the other things that are happening, it's more pardon the pun, out there. Okay, I don't want to be funny on that. I'm not trying to be, but it's more out there, and people thankfully are more accepting of people of who they are, in all the aspects of it. I'm thrilled that we're seeing this in the world, for my own children, family, everybody else. And for me, I go back to the big brother thing because I know there was a time not very long ago, and even depending on where you live in the world, there may be a situation where you can't be as open about your sexuality and what you believe in, and who you are, because of societal conditions or government rule or whatever like that. To provide a place for someone to go to is such an important aspect of it. So thank you for writing the book, first and foremost, because I know the LGBTQ community desperately needs it. And and I would even encourage the people that are female read it as well, because I know that there's things in the book that are um, very applicable. Doesn't matter what your gender is.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a subtle thing with the naming of the book. I did not call it A Guide to Life for Gay Men. I called it A Gay Man's Guide to Life, meaning from my lived experience. And I make no bones about the fact that I wrote it in our cultural language to appeal directly to our hearts. But in reality, it's just kitchen table time honored wisdom that is applicable to all walks of life, and anybody could read it and get something from it. And especially if you have a gay person in your life that you know and love, this is a way that you could understand them better, and get to know more of where they're coming from. Look, there's never been anything like it in recorded human history, meaning the advancements in civil rights that gay people have made over the past few decades. And it's mind-boggling. What I experienced, the trauma that I experienced growing up, was very different than people a few generations older than me, and very different than kids coming up today. Like you said, depending on where you live. But the reality of the situation is, even with all of that wonderful progress, coming out is still not a single experience. It's a very it's a lifelong series of pragmatic decisions. What I have found in my own life, being out for about 30 years now at this point, that date is really when I started publicly telling my story and sharing more of who I am. But I'm still coming out today. The other week, I came out at the grocery store. I mean, it just happened. We continually in society, it's just normal human behavior. We make assumptions about other people just because we're so busy living our lives and don't maybe have time to consider the fullness of someone's story or humanity. And so, in those moments as queer people, we make a pragmatic choice. Do we have the agency? Do we have the wherewithal, the means to share some more of who we are in that moment when maybe somebody's made an assumption, and we have the opportunity to correct them? Or do we fear for our lives or livelihood? And it just depends on the details. And so that's why I think there's no shame in stepping back, and closeting is the wrong term, but stepping back slightly, and waiting for your moment, and taking stock. And it's also why every time that somebody reveals who they truly are, that is something to be celebrated.
I was at a conference it was actually in Tampa. I was in um, the beginning of 2019, before the pandemic, and there was about 200 people. It was a podcasting conference, and there was an individual that was there to present, because basically the premise of the concept of the conference was this was a show for people to get on podcast shows to be interviewed type of situation, and they would teach you the techniques to be a good guest and how to pitch and all of that kind of stuff. And this gentleman stood up and he was giving his pitch to the podcast hosts that were there. I happened to be one of them, and there was 30 something others. So we were all doing this. He publicly came out for the first time at that conference, and he got a standing ovation.
Wow.
And people were warm and welcoming, and the transformation that we saw in him, and obviously he's gone on to do some great things. He's doing some great things. He's actually doing work with that organization that runs that conference now. I don't think that was his initial intent or even an idea back then, but he's really good at the type of things that he needed. So it worked out, perfectly well. But the thing that impacted me the most about that was I saw the transformation from him, from the shoulders being relaxed, and he was finally able to be who he is. And you mentioned something a couple of minutes ago that jumped out at me was, sometimes you have to wait for that moment for you to identify, whether you're coming out as a gay person, or if you're going to be ending a marriage, or all these things. There's that moment where you want to say it, but I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But from what you said, there's a hesitancy, and it's more of a self-protection component, because ultimately none of us want to get hurt, emotionally, physically, or otherwise. But we also want our true selves to be out. Of course, everyone likes to be accepted, of course. But when those situations come up, as you mentioned a couple of minutes ago as well, you know, in the life of a gay person, it's not just okay. on February 22nd, 2019, I announced to the world that I am gay and all that stuff. No, it's, as you said, every interaction with somebody you haven't met before, or maybe it's somebody you haven't seen in a long time, they may not know. So it's, I'm, for me, I'm a straight person, but for me, I think about that and I go, okay, what, do I do myself? Do I need to do to make sure that I am portraying myself as an open, warm, and welcoming human being? So if someone, you know, has this desire to share something to me, whether it's, they're coming out or anything else, how do I give them, as my better half likes to say, a soft pillow? It's like here, and she uses that, especially on how I treat my 19-year-old daughter. She's like, you need to be harder on her. I'm like, but she's too much like me. The other ones I could be hard on. No, I'm not hard. I'm not hard on any of my kids. So at least they may have a different opinion on that, but that's a different episode. Uh, but no, and I know I said a lot there, but it was just some things that came to mind as I was talking about this. Is and I know your book touches on this as well. It's like, okay, this is how you do it. This is not a okay, everything's good, trumpets playing, whatever, and then everything's done. It's like, no, it's life is ongoing, and different things that we are and things we do and all that. It's an elevator pitch in a kind of way, which is a weird analogy for it, I guess. But at the end of the day, it's like that was one of those eye-opening things you just said. It's like that's something you have to deal with on a daily basis potentially. So
Yeah.
love to hear your thoughts
It,
on that.
yeah, absolutely. So, sometimes you just don't want to deal with it. Sometimes you're just tired or in a hurry, and it's like, oh, now I have to like create this space to have a moment, and I'm just trying to get through the grocery store and get on to my next thing. Other times, like you said, maybe you're embarrassed or maybe you're afraid, or I mean, it runs the gamut. The reasons why we shrink from those moments or rise to meet those moments, they really run the gamut. And I love what you said, because this is what is so incumbent, I think, for straight people to do, is to create the space for soft landings, to create the refuge for the full range of diversity, whether it's racial, gender, or sexual orientation. It is immoral to require those of us bearing the burden of bigotry to also, be responsible for eradicating it. And so it's straight work to create that space for gay people, just like it's male work to create it for women or white work to create it for people of color. And so I really love what you said. I think the best way to signal inclusion is to be truly living a life that authentically celebrates diversity. And that is going to shine through. If you try and code switch with your language, and that means all of a sudden speaking terms that you think gay people want to hear, that's going to be transparent. That's not going to work. That's going to feel weird and off-putting and a little cringy. That's not how you do it. On the other hand, if you are naturally living your life encountering gay art and literature and music and cinema and people, and open and cultivating a sense of openness to it, and actually allowing it to come into your heart and permeate your life, you're going to exude that acceptance and even celebration of gay people in a way that you don't even really have to think about it. People are just going to come, you're going to attract people like a beacon. So you don't have to say, hey, I have a gay friend. You don't have to say, oh, my brother's gay. You can share those things about your life, but if that's what you lead with, might come off as a little bit strange. On the other hand, if you are continually creating space and resisting assumptions about others, about how they lead their lives or what it means to be gay or what you think gay culture is or is not, then I think inevitably you're going to attract more diversity into your life. And it's going to be a positive feedback loop where your life gets richer and stronger and more diverse throughout the course of your entire life.
Yeah, the world is a wonderful, colorful place and made up of all kinds of different people, personalities, backgrounds, flavors, you name it. And as I've gotten older, because I grew up in areas that were, predominantly, well, my first city that I was and it was actually predominantly black. So I was would be deemed a minority in that type of situation, but I never looked at it that way. And even you know, growing into different communities where it was predominantly white, it felt weird to me. I'm like, no, I need some more flavor. And where I live in Toronto, because I split my time between Toronto and San Diego, there's a billion different cultures here, and gay, straight, both, neither, you name it. And it's a wonderful experience to be in because you experience life rich and seeking to understand. I think that's one of the things I hammer home with people, whether it's in dispute resolution or burnout recovery or anything else. Seek to understand, leave the judge robe back home, and just, okay, and be inquisitive in a non-judgmental condemning way, or just out of curiosity, return back to when we were little kids and we were curious about things because we were learning. Never stop learning and understand. And thankfully, with the advancements that you've seen and I've seen, in recent memory, it's more open. We're learning more about things, and it's I had a business partner, a few years ago, lesbian. I think the world of her. I don't think of her as a lesbian. I think of her as Arlene. I don't think of her on anything else. Human being. We actually grew up like 20 minutes apart from each other, even though we never knew each other back then. But, it's one of those things where the world is a small place. But at the end of the day, I find that the more open and willing, and, going back to the soft pillow analogy, if we approach life that way, because everybody's dealing with something, even during this pandemic, everybody's been dealing with all kinds of different things. Um, and including relationships, not being able to see friends and family, and all the things we've had to deal with, and hopefully that is ending in many places, and thankfully it is. But the more open and willingness we are, and just accepting people for who they are and celebrating who they are, gives them the encouragement to be happy and fulfilled in life. And that's ultimately what I want for everyone. I want people to be happy and fulfilled, and whatever they have in their life, whether it's relationships, things, where they live, the type of job they have, all that stuff, happy and fulfilled. Boy, oh boy, does that make life a whole lot more rich and fulfilling, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It all starts with curiosity. Curiosity is what leads to empathy, and empathy is what's going to lead to celebration. Most queer people are not looking for tolerance. We're not even looking for acceptance. What we want is to be fully integrated into all facets of society, especially legally. And then out of that, we want to be celebrated in who we are. We are not a monolith. The, the LGBTQIA plus community is so broad and varied and wide. It's hard for us to even keep track of all the terms. And it's our work to create the sense of generosity, to extend our hearts to those who would love us and allow them to put their feet in their mouth from time to time, to say the wrong thing, to step in a cow pie, to make a mistake, and love them anyway, because we see the intention and the effort, and we honor, all that's behind that, rather than keeping score. And what it's the job of straight people is to take those risks. It's so tempting as straight people, especially in the world of social media where everything is documented and potentially incriminating and really embarrassing and permanent. It's so tempting to just clam up. And unfortunately, that aids oppression. What we need is for straight people to take the risk. You're going to say the wrong thing, you're gonna do something dumb. Just like guys are gonna say the wrong thing about women, the white people are gonna say the wrong thing about people of color, and we need to be messy and love anyway. In spite of that, we need to learn how to own up to our mistakes, ask for forgiveness, make amends, and get back to doing the hard work, both personal introspective work and interpersonal loving work. And that messiness, that's where the richness of life happens. Life is not some clean, picture perfect, gift wrapped package with a bow on it. That is an illusion. Life is in the richness is in the messy details. That's where the beauty of diversity exists.
Yes, life is definitely messy, and I've definitely found myself in many piles. And as a kid that had an aunt and uncle that had a farm, I always had this affinity to find the cow pies. My dad was always, it's like, do you not look where you walk? And I said, I do, but I'm obviously, when I look down, I'm already in the pile and stepped into it. So I always went, my shoes went in the trunk, and I was barefoot going home after visits, and dad would take the shoes out in the garage and hose them off, and probably gag a few times, and all that good stuff. So I feel bad for my dad having to do that, but he still loved me, which was good. So before we wrap up, in your book, is there a favorite section? I mean, books are kind of like kids in a way. It's like you don't have a favorite one. You're not supposed to, but and same with your books. There may or may not be a favorite chapter or section, but there's one that when you review it and talk about it, you go, you know what, that one is really impactful to either yourself or to the people that you help.
So my background is in poetry and as a writer, and there are poetic moments in the book. The book is really straightforward, logical, and linear because that's kind of how my brain works. It's not new agey at all, but there are a few moments in there where the feelings are so tender that I purposely waded back into the more artistic realm. In particular, there's a section on relations between straight guys and gay guys, and how in the heck can the two groups be friends? And that was such a sensitive topic to me personally, given all of my past trauma, that I waded into that more poetic license space. And every time I read it, it still takes me back to those feelings and is really touching to me personally. And I've gotten a lot of letters from guys who either wondered why they are such good friends with straight guys and naturally gravitate towards straight guy culture and have felt guilty about it. And this maybe gave them space to accept that love and accept themselves and accept those friendships. And on the other hand, guys who are still apprehensive whenever a straight guy walks in the room. Am I going to be bullied, beaten, et cetera? And so that is probably one of the more, that's what comes to mind as one of the more touching areas of the book, at least to me personally.
No, that's great. No, and I think that's again, it gives people permission and guidance on how to navigate some questions that they may have, and they didn't have a big brother or somebody that they could consult with, and your book has created that opportunity for people to read it and to learn from it. And I highly encourage everybody listening to the show, gay, straight, or otherwise, to read this book. I think it gives it'll move us everybody more towards being as inclusive as humanly possible and empathetic to the challenges that we may not be aware that people face on a daily basis. So, Britt, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you and the time you took for the chat, and obviously for writing the book. So, where can people find out more about you, the book, and everything else you're doing?
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's real easy. Go to my website, britteast.com. B as in boy, RITT East.com. That's the hub for all of my work. I have tons of free articles there that are consolidated there. I have a blog there. I have links to all of my socials. All of that is free. And then, of course, I have a link to all of the participating online retailers where you can purchase my book. And it's available wherever books are sold as well.
That's awesome, and I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So, Britt, thank you again for your time today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and congratulations on the book and all the amazing work you do.
Thanks so much.